No one is coming to save you. Build yourself. Listen carefully. Nobody is coming to save you. Not your friends, not your family, not society, not motivation, not luck. You have been waiting for the perfect moment while life keeps moving without you. Every excuse, every delay, every distraction is slowly destroying the person you could become. This audiobook is about one thing: rebuilding yourself through discipline, emotional control, and relentless action. Because the moment you stop expecting rescue is the moment you become powerful. And by the end of this audiobook, you will never see your life the same way again. Chapter 1. Accept the brutal truth. There comes a moment in every person's life when the excuses stop working. A moment where reality becomes impossible to avoid. And for most people, that moment is painful. It comes after failure, after rejection, after betrayal, after financial struggle, after being ignored, after life humbles them. That is when the brutal truth finally appears. Nobody is coming to save you. Not your friends, not your family, not the government, not motivation, not luck. Nobody is coming. And strangely enough, that is your power. Because the moment you stop waiting for rescue is the moment you finally take control of your life. You have a choice. You can spend the next 5 years blaming people, blaming your childhood, blaming society, blaming your circumstances, blaming bad luck. Or you can accept responsibility and begin rebuilding yourself immediately. That's the key. Weak people wait. Strong people build. Most people secretly believe someone will eventually appear and change their lives for them. They wait for support. They wait for encouragement. They wait for opportunity. They wait for confidence. And while they wait, life keeps moving. Years disappear. Potential dies quietly. Dreams become regret. You cannot build a powerful life with a victim mindset. Victims always surrender responsibility. They say things like, "I can't because of my background. I'm not lucky. Nobody supports me. I didn't have the same opportunities." Maybe that is true. But listen carefully. Life does not reward excuses. Life rewards responsibility. You don't need their permission. You do not need perfect conditions. You need discipline. There are people who started with nothing and built everything because pain forced them to wake up. A man loses his job and suddenly realizes nobody is coming to pay his bills. So he changes. He becomes focused. He becomes disciplined. He learns skills. He sacrifices comfort. Years later, people call him successful, but they never saw the pressure that created him. A woman goes through heartbreak after depending emotionally on someone for years. She feels broken, lost, abandoned, but eventually she realizes something powerful. Nobody is coming to save her emotionally, so she rebuilds herself. She heals. She becomes stronger, more independent, more disciplined, more emotionally intelligent. Pain forced responsibility. That's the pattern. A person goes bankrupt. Another gets rejected repeatedly. Someone gets abandoned by people they trusted. Someone else watches their dreams collapse. And suddenly reality becomes clear. Nobody is coming. That realization hurts weak people, but it awakens strong people. Because when you fully accept responsibility for your life, something changes psychologically. You stop complaining. You stop waiting. You stop begging. You stop blaming. And you begin acting. That's the key. Most people are addicted to comfort, not success. Comfort feels safe. Comfort says, relax, you still have time. But comfort destroys ambition slowly. Comfort keeps people scrolling endlessly instead of learning. Comfort keeps people distracted instead of disciplined. Comfort keeps people entertained while their future quietly disappears. You have a choice. Continue protecting your comfort or start protecting your future. You cannot do both. Understand this clearly. Your life changes the moment you stop expecting external rescue. Because external rescue creates internal weakness. The more dependent you become on motivation, validation, approval, and emotional support, the weaker your discipline becomes. Strong people learn how to function without applause. That is power. There will be days nobody believes in you. Days nobody encourages you. Days nobody notices your effort. You still must continue. It's not about motivation, it's about discipline. The world respects people who move without excuses. Think about the people you admire most: athletes, leaders, entrepreneurs, creators, builders. Most of them faced isolation before success. Most of them were doubted before respected. Most of them suffered privately before winning publicly. But they accepted responsibility early. And responsibility changes everything. Because once you fully own your life, your decisions become sharper. You wake up differently, you think differently, you spend time differently, you stop wasting energy blaming circumstances you cannot control, and you start mastering the things you can control: your habits, your focus, your emotions, your discipline, your consistency. That's where power lives. Not in excuses, not in fantasies, not in waiting, in responsibility. You don't need their permission. Read that again mentally. You do not need people to believe in your vision before you begin. You do not need validation before taking action. You do not need everyone to understand your goals. You need action, consistent action, daily action, painful action, because transformation is built through repeated behavior, not emotional speeches. And here is another brutal truth most people avoid. Nobody cares as much about your future as you do. That sounds harsh, but it is liberating, because once you understand that, you stop expecting other people to carry responsibilities that belong to you. Your health is your responsibility. Your mindset is your responsibility. Your discipline is your responsibility. Your future is your responsibility. Nobody is coming. That is your power. The strongest people in the world are usually people who accepted this reality early. They stopped expecting rescue. They stopped chasing pity. They stopped explaining themselves endlessly. And they quietly built themselves through repetition, sacrifice, and discipline. You have a choice. Remain the person waiting for life to become easier, or become the person who becomes stronger, because life rarely becomes easier. But disciplined people become harder to break. That's the key. The truth may hurt your feelings initially, but truth also creates freedom, because when you stop blaming the world, you regain control over your direction, and control changes everything. This chapter is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming responsible. It is about understanding that your future depends more on your habits than your circumstances, more on your discipline than your emotions, more on your actions than your excuses. Nobody is coming to save you. Accept that fully, not with fear, with power. Because the moment you stop waiting for rescue is the moment you finally begin building the life you actually want. You accepted the brutal truth. Now it is time to destroy the next weakness holding people back: the addiction to waiting for motivation. Chapter 2. Stop waiting for motivation. Most people are waiting to feel ready. That is why most people never change. They wait for motivation. They wait for inspiration. They wait for the perfect mood, the perfect Monday, the perfect moment. And while they wait, disciplined people keep moving. That's the difference. Motivation feels powerful in the beginning. It gives emotional energy. It creates excitement. It makes people feel unstoppable for a few hours. But motivation is emotional, and emotions are unstable. Some days you feel confident. Some days you feel tired. Some days you feel focused. Some days you feel distracted. If your entire life depends on emotions, your progress will always be inconsistent. That's the key. Motivation can start a person, but only discipline can sustain a person. You have a choice. You can continue living emotionally, or you can build systems that work even when your emotions disappear, because eventually they will. There will be mornings you do not feel like waking up early, days you do not feel like training, moments you do not feel like studying, working, creating, improving, or continuing. You must learn how to move anyway. Do it tired, do it uninspired, do it anyway. That sentence alone can change your life if you truly understand it. Weak people only act when emotions support them. Strong people act regardless of emotion. Think about athletes. Nobody sees the painful mornings. Nobody sees the injuries. Nobody sees the lonely training sessions. People only see the victory. But champions are not created on competition day. They are created in routine, in repetition, in discipline. An athlete does not wake up every morning feeling excited to train. A soldier does not wait for motivation before completing a mission. An entrepreneur does not build success by working only when inspired. A writer does not finish books by waiting for creative moods. They move because discipline became identity. That's the key. Successful people remove negotiation from important actions. They do not ask themselves every day, "Do I feel like it?" They already decided. And that decision creates power. Most people waste enormous energy negotiating with themselves constantly. Maybe tomorrow. I'll start next week. I'm not in the mood today. That pattern destroys lives quietly because delay becomes identity. Procrastination becomes personality. And eventually people become experts at avoiding their own potential. You don't need their permission. You do not need motivation from social media videos every morning just to function. You need standards. You need structure. You need discipline. Understand this clearly. Feelings are temporary, standards are permanent, and disciplined people build their lives around standards, not moods. That means you train even when tired. You study even when distracted. You continue even when progress feels invisible. Do it tired. Do it uninspired. Do it anyway. Most people underestimate the power of routine. They want dramatic transformation overnight, but real transformation happens quietly. One workout, one disciplined morning, one focused hour, one difficult decision repeated daily. That is how lives change. Slowly, repeatedly, silently. It's not about intensity, it's about consistency. That's the key. There are people with enormous talent who fail because they lack discipline. And there are average people who outperform everyone because they became consistent. Consistency beats emotion every time. Think about the military. Soldiers train routines repeatedly until action becomes automatic. Why? Because in difficult situations, emotions become unreliable. Fear appears, pressure appears, pain appears, discomfort appears. Routine keeps them functioning under chaos. Your life is no different. When pressure enters your life, you fall back to your habits, not your intentions, not your motivational speeches, your habits. So ask yourself honestly, what habits are currently shaping your future? Because your future is being built right now, not someday, right now. Every repeated behavior is shaping your identity. Every excuse strengthens weakness. Every disciplined action strengthens character. You have a choice. Continue building excuses or start building discipline. Most people think discipline is punishment. It is not. Discipline is freedom. Discipline frees you from chaos. Discipline frees you from emotional instability. Discipline frees you from regret. A person who controls their habits controls their future. That is power. You do not need to feel powerful every day. You need to act powerfully every day. There is a massive difference. Because action creates momentum, and momentum creates confidence. People often wait to feel confident before taking action, but confidence usually comes after action, after repetition, after proof, after discipline. That's the key. You build self-respect by keeping promises to yourself. Every time you say you will do something and fail to follow through, your mind loses trust in you. But every time you execute despite discomfort, you strengthen self-respect internally. That matters more than motivation. Self-respect changes posture, it changes mindset, it changes standards, and disciplined people protect their standards aggressively. They understand something weak people ignore. Your daily habits either build your future or destroy it. Nothing stays neutral. Scrolling endlessly has consequences. Avoiding responsibility has consequences. Wasting time has consequences. So does discipline. So does focus. So does consistency. You have a choice. And every day you repeat that choice until it becomes your identity. Do not misunderstand this chapter. Discipline is not about becoming emotionless. It is about becoming reliable. Reliable to yourself, reliable under pressure, reliable when life becomes difficult. Because difficult seasons reveal who truly has discipline. Anyone can work hard when inspired. Anyone can stay focused when life feels easy. But can you continue when nobody claps for you? Can you continue when results are slow? Can you continue when you feel exhausted? That is where transformation begins. Do it tired, do it uninspired, do it anyway. Most people quit too early because they expect progress to feel exciting constantly. Real growth is repetitive, boring sometimes, painful sometimes, invisible sometimes. But repetition creates mastery, and mastery changes lives. The people you admire most are not always more talented than you. Often, they simply became more disciplined than you. That truth may hurt your ego, but it can also transform your future. Because discipline is learnable. Anyone can build it. One decision at a time, one habit at a time, one repeated action at a time. You don't need their permission. You do not need emotional hype to become powerful. You need standards. You need structure. You need consistency. Because the strongest people are not controlled by moods. They are controlled by purpose. And purpose continues moving even when emotions disappear. You stopped waiting for rescue in the last chapter. Now you must stop waiting for motivation. Because waiting weakens people. Action builds people. And once you master disciplined action, you are ready to confront the silent behaviors destroying your potential every day. Chapter 3, Kill the Habits That Are Killing You. Most people destroy their future quietly, not through one massive mistake, but through small repeated habits. That's what makes dangerous habits so difficult to notice. They feel harmless in the moment. One more hour scrolling, one more day procrastinating, one more excuse, one more delay, one more night wasted on distractions. And slowly your discipline weakens, your focus weakens, your confidence weakens, your future weakens. Your habits are building someone right now. The question is, who? That is the real question most people avoid asking themselves. Because habits are never neutral. Every repeated action is shaping your identity. You are becoming someone through repetition, either someone disciplined or someone distracted, someone focused or someone weak. You have a choice. Most people think success is built from huge moments. It is not. Success is usually built from small actions repeated consistently for years. And failure works the exact same way. A lazy morning repeated long enough becomes a lazy life. Constant distraction repeated long enough becomes a weak mind. Avoiding difficult tasks repeatedly becomes a fearful personality. That's the key. You do not suddenly become disciplined. You train discipline daily. And most people are training the wrong habits every single day without realizing it. Look at modern life carefully. People wake up and immediately reach for their phones. Before they think, before they plan, before they breathe intentionally, their minds instantly become consumed by noise, notifications, entertainment, opinions, distractions, comparison. And then they wonder why they cannot focus anymore. Attention is power, and distracted people slowly lose control of their minds. Social media itself is not always the problem. Lack of control is the problem. It's not about technology, it's about discipline. That's the key. Can you sit quietly without stimulation? Can you focus deeply without checking your phone every few minutes? Can you work on your future without constant entertainment? Most people cannot. Their minds have been trained for instant pleasure. And instant pleasure creates weak discipline. You have a choice. You can continue feeding distraction, or you can rebuild your attention. Because attention determines direction. Whatever controls your attention eventually controls your life. That is why procrastination is so dangerous. Procrastination is not laziness alone. It is avoidance. Avoidance of discomfort. Avoidance of uncertainty. Avoidance of responsibility. People delay important actions because temporary comfort feels easier. But temporary comfort creates permanent regret. That's the truth. Every time you delay necessary action, you strengthen hesitation internally. Every time you avoid discomfort, you train weakness. And eventually, avoidance becomes identity. You start becoming the type of person who talks more than acts, plans more than executes, dreams more than builds. Your habits are building someone right now. The question is, who? Pay attention to your routines, because routines reveal the truth about priorities. Not your intentions, not your motivational quotes, your behavior. A person says they want success, but spends 6 hours daily consuming entertainment. Another says they want confidence, but constantly avoids difficult situations. Someone else says they want financial freedom, but refuses to build skills consistently. That is not lack of desire. That is lack of discipline. And discipline determines outcomes. You don't need their permission. You do not need another motivational video. You need awareness. You need honesty. You need standards. Because transformation begins when you stop lying to yourself about your habits. Ask yourself difficult questions. What is stealing your time? What is weakening your focus? What habits are silently destroying your future? Because many people are not failing dramatically, they are failing gradually. Comfort is dangerous because it feels safe. Comfort says, relax, you can start tomorrow. Take another break. You deserve endless entertainment, but comfort slowly destroys urgency. And without urgency, people waste years. That's the key. Disciplined people protect their environment carefully. They understand something powerful. Bad habits grow automatically. Good habits require intention. Nobody accidentally becomes disciplined. Nobody accidentally becomes focused. Nobody accidentally becomes mentally strong. Those qualities are trained repeatedly, through structure, through repetition, through conscious behavior. Think about physical health. One unhealthy meal will not destroy a body, but repeated unhealthy habits over years will. The same applies mentally. Constant distraction weakens concentration. Constant negativity weakens mindset. Constant procrastination weakens action. And eventually, weak habits create weak identities. Your habits are building someone right now. The question is, who? You must become more conscious about what you consume daily. Books, conversations, videos, music, environments, people. Because everything influences identity slowly. Weak environments create weak standards. Focused environments create focused behavior. That's why disciplined people sometimes disappear temporarily, not because they hate people, but because they understand protection. They protect their attention, they protect their habits, they protect their future. You have a choice. Continue living reactively, or start living intentionally. Because intentional people design routines that support their goals. They wake up with structure, they remove distractions aggressively, they build habits that support growth instead of comfort. Simple actions matter more than people realize. Sleeping earlier, reading daily, training consistently, planning mornings, limiting distractions, finishing difficult tasks first. Those actions look small individually, but repeated over months and years, they completely transform identity. That's the key. You become what you repeatedly do, not what you occasionally say, not what you hope for, not what you post online. Your repeated behavior creates your future. And here is another uncomfortable truth. Many people are addicted to entertainment because it helps them escape responsibility temporarily. Entertainment numbs pressure, distraction numbs anxiety, scrolling numbs insecurity, but escape never solves problems, it delays them, and delayed problems usually grow larger. Strong people face reality directly. Weak people constantly avoid it. You don't need their permission. You do not need approval to disconnect from distractions. You do not need validation to protect your focus. You do not need people to understand why you are becoming more disciplined. Because most people will never understand discipline until they suffer the consequences of lacking it. And consequences eventually arrive for everyone. That is why habits matter so much. Your daily actions are either building strength or creating regret. Every day, every hour, every decision, your habits are building someone right now. The question is, who? Look honestly at your life. If nothing changed for the next 5 years except your current habits, Where would you end up? That answer should either motivate you or terrify you. Because the future is not mysterious. It is usually the result of repeated behavior. You have a choice. Continue feeding habits that weaken you, or build habits that strengthen you, because eventually habits stop feeling like actions. They become identity, and identity determines destiny. You stopped waiting for rescue. You stopped waiting for motivation. Now you understand that your habits are either building your future or destroying it quietly. The next step is even more difficult, because after discipline begins growing, another trap appears: the need for approval. Chapter 4. Stop seeking validation. One of the biggest reasons people never become who they were meant to be is simple. They care too much about what other people think. That fear controls them. It controls their decisions, their dreams, their voice, their actions. They wait for approval before movement. And while they wait, disciplined people quietly build their lives. That's the difference. Weak people need applause before action. Strong people act before applause arrives. That's the key. Most people are addicted to validation and do not even realize it. They post for approval, speak for approval, dress for approval, live for approval, and eventually they lose themselves completely trying to satisfy people who are not even thinking about them that much. Validation is a distraction from the real work. Read that again mentally. Validation is a distraction from the real work, because every second spent obsessing over opinions is energy stolen from execution. You have a choice. You can build your future, or you can spend your life managing perceptions. You cannot master both. The dangerous thing about validation is that it feels rewarding temporarily. People praise you, people notice you, people approve, and your ego feels safe. But external approval is unstable. The moment criticism appears, insecure people collapse emotionally. That is why emotionally dependent people struggle with consistency. Their confidence depends on reactions. Strong people build internal confidence instead. Confidence built from discipline, from repetition, from keeping promises to themselves. That confidence lasts longer because it is earned privately. You don't need their permission. You do not need people to approve your goals before you begin. You do not need validation to improve yourself. You do not need applause to become disciplined. Most people delay action because they fear judgment. But listen carefully. People will judge you whether you act or not. If you try, they judge you. If you fail, they judge you. If you succeed, they judge you. If you stay average, they still judge you. So you might as well build the life you actually want. That's the key. History proves this repeatedly. Creators were mocked before becoming respected. Inventors were doubted before becoming admired. Leaders were criticized before becoming influential. Every powerful person eventually faced misunderstanding. That is part of the process. People often resist what they do not understand initially. Think about entrepreneurs who started businesses while others laughed at them. Writers whose work was rejected repeatedly. Athletes nobody believed in. Artists ignored for years. Innovators criticized for thinking differently. Most successful people spent years looking foolish before becoming respected, but they continued anyway. Why? Because they understood something powerful. Validation is a distraction from the real work. The real work is discipline. The real work is consistency. The real work is skill building. The real work is improvement, not opinions, not applause, not attention. Attention can become dangerous if you depend on it emotionally, because dependence weakens courage. People who constantly seek approval begin making safe decisions. Small decisions, comfortable decisions, predictable decisions. They avoid risks because they fear criticism, and fear destroys potential quietly. You have a choice. Continue living for approval, or begin living with purpose. Because purpose-driven people understand something most people ignore. Not everyone will understand your vision immediately. That is normal. Sometimes your growth will offend insecure people. Sometimes your discipline will make distracted people uncomfortable. Sometimes your ambition will threaten people who settled for less. That is not your problem. Your responsibility is not managing everyone's emotions. Your responsibility is building your life. You don't need their permission. The strongest people in the world often move silently. They stop announcing every goal, stop explaining every dream, stop seeking emotional approval before action. Instead, they focus on execution. Quiet execution creates confidence, and confidence built through action is more powerful than confidence built through compliments. That's the key. Understand this clearly. Validation creates emotional dependence. Discipline creates emotional stability. A person addicted to approval constantly changes identity depending on the environment. One group tells them who to become, then another group changes them again. They never develop true self-respect because they are always performing. But disciplined people become rooted internally. Their values remain stable, their standards remain clear, their focus remains strong, even when nobody notices them. That is power. Many people never start because they are terrified of looking foolish temporarily. But every beginner looks inexperienced initially. That is unavoidable. The person learning fitness struggles early. The person starting a business makes mistakes early. The person building confidence feels awkward early. Growth always looks uncomfortable in the beginning. That's normal. What matters is continuation, not perfection. Validation is a distraction from the real work. Most people want visible success immediately. They want people to notice them before they have built anything meaningful. But real growth often happens invisibly first, in silence, in repetition, in private discipline. Nobody claps while you are struggling internally. Nobody applauds your lonely mornings. Nobody celebrates your invisible sacrifices initially. But those moments matter most, because private discipline creates public results eventually. You have a choice. You can chase attention, or you can chase mastery. Attention fades quickly. Mastery lasts longer. And mastery requires humility. It requires accepting temporary invisibility while you improve. That is difficult for insecure people, because insecure people want immediate recognition. Strong people want long-term transformation. There is a massive difference. It's not about attention. It's about discipline. It's not about approval. It's about growth. It's not about being seen. It's about becoming. That's the key. Many people waste years trying to impress others instead of improving themselves. They buy things they cannot afford, pretend to be someone they are not, force fake confidence online, perform constantly for strangers. Meanwhile, internally, they remain lost, because external validation cannot fix internal emptiness. Only discipline can do that. Only growth can do that. Only self-respect can do that. And self-respect comes from action, from keeping promises, from facing discomfort, from improving consistently. Not from compliments. You don't need their permission. You do not need everyone to believe in your future. Sometimes people only understand your vision after results appear. That is human nature. But if you require approval before beginning, you will remain stuck forever. You must become willing to walk alone temporarily. That is where real growth begins. When you stop performing, stop explaining, stop begging for understanding, and start building quietly. Because quiet discipline eventually becomes undeniable. Validation is a distraction from the real work. Never forget that. Your real task is becoming stronger mentally, more disciplined emotionally, more focused daily, more committed privately. That is how powerful people are built, not through popularity, through consistency. You stopped waiting for rescue. You stopped waiting for motivation. You started confronting destructive habits. Now you are learning to detach from approval itself. Because real growth begins when your actions stop depending on applause. And once you stop needing validation, you become capable of handling something even more important: pain. Chapter 5, Train Your Mind to Endure Pain. Most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid pain. That is why most people never grow. They avoid discomfort, avoid rejection, avoid sacrifice, avoid difficulty, avoid pressure. And in avoiding pain, they also avoid transformation, because growth and discomfort are connected. always. You cannot become mentally strong while remaining emotionally comfortable all the time. That's impossible. Pain is not punishment. Pain is preparation. That is the truth most people refuse to accept. They think struggle means something is wrong, but often struggle means you are changing. Think about physical training. A weak body becomes stronger through resistance. Muscles grow through stress. Endurance grows through exhaustion. Strength develops through pressure. Nobody becomes physically powerful by staying comfortable constantly. The mind works the same way. Mental resilience is built through difficult seasons, not easy ones. That's the key. The problem is that modern life trains people to escape discomfort immediately. Feeling bored? Grab entertainment. Feeling stressed? Seek distraction. Feeling lonely? Seek validation. Feeling pressure? Quit. People are becoming emotionally fragile because they never train themselves to endure difficulty, and fragile people break easily under pressure. You have a choice. You can spend your life escaping discomfort, or you can train yourself to endure it, because endurance creates power. Pain is not punishment. Pain is preparation. Never forget that. Some of the strongest people in the world were shaped during painful seasons, not during easy ones. A man loses everything financially and is forced to rebuild from nothing. That pain teaches him discipline, urgency, and responsibility. A woman goes through heartbreak and learns emotional independence for the first time in her life. An athlete loses repeatedly before finally becoming disciplined enough to win. An entrepreneur faces rejection for years before success finally arrives. Pain shaped them. Pressure refined them. Difficulty revealed who they truly were. Most people think resilience means never feeling pain. Wrong. Resilience means continuing despite pain. That's the difference. Courage is not the absence of fear. Discipline is not the absence of exhaustion. Strength is not the absence of struggle. It is the ability to continue anyway. Do not expect growth to feel comfortable. Real transformation often feels lonely, because when you begin changing, your old habits start dying. Old distractions lose control over you. Old environments stop fitting you. Old mindsets begin collapsing. That process feels uncomfortable, but discomfort is often evidence of growth. That's the key. Pain is not punishment. Pain is preparation. There are people who quit too early because they misunderstand pain completely. They think, this is too hard. This feels uncomfortable. Maybe this path is not for me. No. Sometimes the difficulty is preparing you for a higher level of responsibility. Think about delayed gratification. Weak people sacrifice the future for temporary comfort. Strong people sacrifice temporary comfort for the future. That difference changes everything. One person spends money emotionally, another invests carefully. One person avoids difficult conversations, another faces them directly. One person quits when results are slow, another continues patiently. That patience creates power, because discipline requires delayed gratification, and delayed gratification requires emotional strength. You have a choice. You can chase comfort now and regret later, or endure discomfort now and gain freedom later. Most people choose immediate pleasure because they never train themselves mentally. That is why emotional control matters so much. A weak mind constantly seeks escape. A disciplined mind tolerates discomfort strategically. That's the key. There will be seasons where life feels unfair, moments where effort goes unnoticed, times where progress feels invisible, periods where loneliness feels heavy. You must learn how to continue anyway. Pain is not punishment. Pain is preparation. That phrase matters because perspective changes endurance. If you see every hardship as destruction, you will collapse emotionally. But if you see hardship as preparation, your mindset changes completely. Pressure becomes training. Failure becomes feedback. Rejection becomes redirection. Loss becomes wisdom. That perspective creates resilience. And resilient people become difficult to break. Think about soldiers during training. The training is difficult intentionally. Pressure creates readiness. Discomfort creates discipline. Pain creates endurance. The purpose is preparation. Your life works the same way. The challenges you are facing right now may be preparing you mentally for responsibilities you cannot yet see. That is why quitting too early is dangerous. Sometimes the breakthrough arrives after the difficult season, not before it. But weak people quit during pressure. Strong people adapt during pressure. That's the difference. You don't need their permission. You do not need people to understand your struggles completely. You do not need constant sympathy to continue growing. Sometimes your greatest growth will happen privately, silently, without applause, without recognition. That is normal. Many powerful people developed resilience during isolated seasons nobody witnessed. The gym sessions nobody saw, the failures nobody understood, the sacrifices nobody respected initially. But private endurance creates public strength eventually. That's the key. Pain reveals character. Pressure exposes habits. Difficulty uncovers emotional weakness. That is why hard seasons are valuable if you respond correctly. They reveal what still needs strengthening: your patience, your focus, your emotional control, your discipline, your mindset. Everything hidden eventually becomes visible under pressure. That is why mentally strong people stop fearing difficulty. They understand discomfort contains lessons. Weak people ask, "Why is this happening to me?" Strong people ask, "What is this teaching me?" That shift changes everything. You have a choice. Become bitter through pain, or become stronger through pain. Because pain itself does not automatically create growth. Response creates growth. Two people can suffer the same difficulty. One becomes wiser, the other becomes weaker. The difference is mindset. The difference is discipline. The difference is perspective. Pain is not punishment. Pain is preparation. Many people spend years trying to build confidence without building endurance first. But confidence grows after surviving difficult situations repeatedly, after enduring rejection, after surviving failure, after continuing despite exhaustion. That is how self-belief becomes real, not through affirmations alone, but through evidence. Evidence built through endurance. That's why disciplined people become calm under pressure. They have already survived difficult seasons mentally. They trust themselves more, not because life became easier, but because they became stronger. And strength changes perception. The challenge that once terrified you eventually becomes manageable because endurance expanded your capacity. That is growth. Not perfection, expansion. You don't need their permission. You do not need an easy path to become powerful. You need resilience. You need emotional endurance. You need the ability to continue moving through discomfort without collapsing mentally. Because the people who transform their lives are not always the most talented. Often, they are simply the people who refuse to quit during painful seasons. Pain is not punishment. Pain is preparation. Remember that during difficult moments, because difficulty is shaping you right now, either into someone weaker or someone stronger. You have a choice. You stopped waiting for rescue. You stopped depending on motivation. You confronted destructive habits. You detached from validation. Now you are learning how to endure pain itself. And once you can endure pressure without breaking emotionally, you become capable of mastering something even more dangerous: your reactions. In Chapter 6, Master Emotional Control. Most people are controlled by emotions. That is why most people stay weak. One insult ruins their mood. One rejection destroys their confidence. One difficult moment causes emotional collapse. One stressful situation destroys focus. And because they cannot control themselves internally, they lose control externally. That is dangerous, because emotional reactions destroy opportunities. They destroy relationships. They destroy leadership. They destroy focus. One emotional decision can create years of regret. That's the key. Emotional control is power, not loudness, not aggression, not constant emotional expression. Real power is calmness under pressure. Calm people control chaotic situations. Never forget that. Look at strong leaders during crises. Look at experienced athletes under pressure. Look at disciplined soldiers in dangerous environments. The people who remain calm usually maintain control, while emotional people panic, react impulsively, and make destructive decisions. That pattern appears everywhere in life. Weak people react emotionally. Strong people respond strategically. There is a massive difference between reaction and response. Reaction is automatic. Response is controlled. Reaction is emotional. Response is discipline. And discipline changes outcomes. You have a choice. You can let emotions control your behavior, or you can train yourself to remain calm under pressure. Because pressure reveals emotional maturity. Anyone can appear calm during easy moments, but difficult situations expose people quickly. The angry person becomes reckless. The insecure person becomes defensive. The fearful person avoids responsibility. The emotional person loses clarity. That is why emotional control matters so much. Calm people control chaotic situations. That phrase is not weakness, it is strategy. Think about arguments. Emotionally reactive people speak impulsively. They interrupt. They explode. They say things they regret later. Disciplined people pause, observe, think carefully. Sometimes silence itself becomes power, because silence prevents unnecessary destruction. That's the key. Most people speak too quickly when emotional, and words spoken emotionally often create damage that cannot easily be repaired. That is why self-control matters. Not every opinion requires reaction. Not every insult deserves attention. Not every conflict deserves your energy. Strong people conserve emotional energy carefully. Weak people waste emotional energy constantly. You don't need their permission. You do not need to react to every attack, criticism, or misunderstanding. Sometimes emotional detachment is maturity. And emotional detachment does not mean you stop caring completely. It means you stop allowing temporary emotions to control permanent decisions. That difference changes everything. Many people sabotage opportunities because they lack patience emotionally. They quit too early, explode too quickly, respond impulsively, overreact unnecessarily, then regret arrives later. That is why patience is strength. Patience allows clarity, and clarity improves decisions. Calm people control chaotic situations. Most people think emotional control means suppressing emotions completely. Wrong. Emotions are natural. Anger is natural. Fear is natural. Disappointment is natural. The problem is not feeling emotions. The problem is becoming enslaved by emotions. That's the key. Disciplined people acknowledge emotions without surrendering control to them. They feel anger without becoming destructive. They feel fear without becoming paralyzed. They feel pressure without collapsing mentally. That is emotional strength. And emotional strength must be trained intentionally. You train emotional control through pauses, through observation, through discipline, through resisting impulsive reactions. Simple habits matter. Pause before responding emotionally. Breathe before reacting impulsively. Think before speaking. Observe before judging. Those moments of restraint create enormous power over time. You have a choice. Continue living emotionally reactive, or become emotionally disciplined, because emotional discipline protects your future. Think about relationships. Many relationships collapse because people react emotionally instead of communicating wisely. Pride destroys connection. Anger destroys trust. Impulsiveness destroys stability. One uncontrolled moment can damage years of progress. That is why mature people learn emotional restraint, not because they are weak, because they understand consequences. Strong people think long-term, weak people react short-term. That's the difference. Calm people control chaotic situations. The workplace is another example. Emotionally unstable people struggle under pressure. Criticism affects them deeply. Stress destroys their focus. Difficult situations expose insecurity quickly. But emotionally disciplined people remain composed. They solve problems calmly. They think clearly under pressure. They maintain professionalism even during difficult moments. That emotional stability creates trust, and trust creates leadership. That's why emotional control is connected to influence. Nobody trusts emotionally unpredictable people consistently. You don't need their permission. You do not need to explain every emotion publicly. Modern culture encourages constant emotional exposure, but constant emotional expression without discipline creates instability. Strong people process emotions wisely instead of broadcasting every feeling impulsively. Sometimes silence is wisdom. Sometimes restraint is strength. Sometimes walking away peacefully requires more power than reacting aggressively. That's the key. Emotional control also protects focus. Because emotional chaos destroys concentration. One negative comment ruins productivity for hours. One emotional argument destroys an entire day. One stressful interaction consumes mental energy unnecessarily. Disciplined people learn how to recover quickly emotionally. They do not allow temporary situations to control their entire mindset. That skill becomes extremely valuable in life, especially during difficult seasons. Because difficult seasons test emotional maturity constantly. Pressure reveals emotional weaknesses. That is unavoidable. The question is not whether emotions will appear. The question is whether emotions will control you. You have a choice, and every difficult moment becomes training. Training patience, training restraint, training emotional awareness, training self-control. That is why emotionally strong people become dangerous in powerful ways. Not dangerous through aggression, dangerous through stability. Because stable people become difficult to manipulate. Manipulative people often rely on emotional reactions. They provoke anger, fear, insecurity, confusion. Why? Because emotional people are easier to control, but disciplined people think before reacting. That changes power completely. Calm people control chaotic situations. Remember that during conflict. Remember that during stress. Remember that during pressure. Because emotional control creates freedom internally. Freedom from impulsive behavior. Freedom from emotional instability. Freedom from unnecessary suffering caused by poor reactions. It's not about emotionlessness, it's about discipline. That's the key. There will always be difficult people, difficult situations, unexpected stress, unfair criticism, painful moments. You cannot control all external circumstances, but you can control your response. That is where your power lives. Strong people master themselves first. Weak people try controlling everyone else instead, and self-mastery changes everything. Because once you control your reactions, your decisions improve, your focus improves, your relationships improve, your leadership improves, your confidence improves. Why? Because emotional discipline creates internal stability, and stable people become powerful under pressure. You don't need their permission. You do not need to prove your strength through emotional reactions. Real strength often appears through restraint, through patience, through calmness, through discipline. Because calm people control chaotic situations. Never forget that. You stopped waiting for rescue. You stopped depending on motivation. You confronted destructive habits. You detached from validation. You learned how to endure pain. Now you are mastering emotional control itself. And once you gain control over your emotions, you become ready for the next transformation, turning your full attention inward. Chapter 7. Focus on yourself until you change your life. Most people are obsessed with other people's lives. That is why they never build their own. They watch, compare, scroll, judge, analyze. Meanwhile, their own future remains neglected. That is the tragedy of distraction. People spend years studying successful people without ever studying themselves. Years watching content without creating anything. Years admiring discipline without developing discipline. Years talking about change without changing. And slowly, life passes them by. That's the key. Attention is limited. If your focus constantly belongs to everyone else, your growth will suffer. You have a choice. You can continue consuming other people's lives, or you can finally start building your own. Because focused people transform. Distracted people remain stuck. Disappear for a while. Build yourself. That sentence sounds simple, but it requires enormous discipline. Because disappearing means reducing distraction, reducing noise, reducing unnecessary social validation, reducing emotional dependence on attention. Most people cannot do that. They need constant stimulation, constant interaction, constant visibility. But growth often requires temporary isolation, not permanent isolation, strategic isolation. There is a difference. Strategic isolation creates focus. It gives your mind room to think clearly, to plan clearly, to improve quietly. That's why many successful people disappear temporarily during transformation seasons. Athletes disappear into training. Entrepreneurs disappear into building. Writers disappear into creation. Disciplined people disappear into growth, and when they return, people call it sudden success. But nothing was sudden. The work was simply invisible. That's the key. Most people only respect visible results. They never see the lonely mornings, the repetitive routines, the sacrifices, the discipline, the quiet self-improvement. Disappear for a while. Build yourself. There are people right now wasting years trying to impress strangers online while neglecting their health, finances, mindset, and future completely. That is dangerous because attention can become addictive. People begin performing instead of progressing, talking instead of building, posting instead of improving, looking productive instead of becoming productive. It's not about appearances, it's about discipline. That's the key. Real growth often looks boring externally. Wake up early, train consistently, study daily, save money, build skills, read books, improve emotionally, repeat. There is nothing glamorous about repetition, but repetition changes lives. Most people never reach their potential because they cannot tolerate temporary invisibility. They want recognition too early. They want praise before results. But real builders understand something important. The season of silence is necessary because silence creates focus, and focus creates transformation. You don't need their permission. You do not need to announce every goal publicly. You do not need to explain every move. You do not need everyone to understand why you are becoming more disciplined. Sometimes protecting your energy requires distance. Distance from distractions, distance from negativity, distance from environments that weaken your focus. That is not arrogance. That is strategy. You have a choice. Stay constantly distracted or become intentional about your environment because environment influences identity. Weak environments create weak habits. Focused environments strengthen discipline. That is why disciplined people become selective about what they consume, what they watch, what they discuss, who they spend time around, because attention shapes behavior, and behavior shapes destiny. Disappear for a while, build yourself. Imagine dedicating 1 full year seriously to self-improvement, 1 year focused on your health, your mindset, your finances, your discipline, your skills, your emotional control, your habits. Do you realize how much your life could change? Most people underestimate consistency because they are addicted to instant results. But transformation compounds quietly. Daily reading compounds. Daily training compounds. Daily discipline compounds. Everything repeated compounds. That's the key. The problem is that most people constantly interrupt their own growth. They start improving, then return to distraction, return to comfort, return to comparison, return to wasting time emotionally, and momentum disappears again. Focused people protect momentum aggressively because momentum creates identity. Once disciplined actions become routine, life begins changing rapidly. But reaching that point requires sacrifice. It requires saying no to distractions, no to unnecessary drama, no to endless entertainment, no to environments that drain energy. Weak people fear missing out. Strong people fear wasting potential. There is a massive difference. You don't need their permission. You do not need social approval to focus on your growth. Sometimes people become uncomfortable when you start improving. Why? Because your discipline exposes their excuses. Your focus reminds them of their distractions. Your growth challenges their comfort. That is why not everyone will support your transformation initially. And that is okay. Not everyone is supposed to understand your journey. That's the key. There are moments in life where you must choose between popularity and progress, between attention and improvement, between comfort and transformation. Disciplined people choose transformation, even when it feels lonely temporarily, because loneliness with purpose is more valuable than distraction without direction. Understand this clearly. Temporary isolation can create permanent improvement. That does not mean becoming antisocial completely. It means becoming intentional. Intentional with time, intentional with focus, intentional with energy. Most people waste enormous amounts of energy reacting to unnecessary noise daily, drama, opinions, arguments, comparison, distraction, And then they wonder why they feel mentally exhausted constantly. Focused people eliminate unnecessary noise. That creates clarity, and clarity creates power. Disappear for a while. Build yourself. Build your body until confidence grows naturally. Build your mindset until pressure no longer controls you. Build your finances until desperation disappears. Build your habits until discipline becomes identity. Build your emotional strength until distractions lose power over you. That is how lives transform. Quietly, consistently, powerfully. You have a choice. Continue observing life from the sidelines, or become deeply committed to your own growth, because your future depends on where your attention goes daily. Most people know more about celebrities than themselves, more about trends than their purpose, more about entertainment than discipline. That is why their lives remain stagnant. Focused people reverse that pattern. They become students of themselves. They study weaknesses honestly, study habits honestly, study emotional patterns honestly, and then they improve intentionally. That level of self-awareness changes everything, because awareness creates correction, and correction creates growth. That's the key. Real self-improvement is not performance. It is construction. You are building a stronger version of yourself through repeated disciplined behavior. One habit at a time, one focused day at a time, one difficult decision at a time. And eventually people begin noticing the results, not because you chased attention, but because discipline became visible. Disappear for a while. Build yourself. Never forget that. You stopped waiting for rescue. You stopped depending on motivation. You confronted destructive habits. You detached from validation. You learned how to endure pain. You mastered emotional control. Now you are learning how to focus your energy inward completely. And once you become deeply focused on self-development, something powerful begins to grow naturally. Real confidence. Chapter 8, Build Silent Confidence. Most people misunderstand confidence. They think confidence is loud. Loud talking, loud opinions, loud energy, constant self-promotion. But loudness is often insecurity wearing a mask. Real confidence is quieter, calmer, more stable. Because real confidence is built on proof, not performance. Confidence is earned privately before it is displayed publicly. That's the key. A truly confident person does not need to convince everyone constantly. Why? Because they already convince themselves through discipline, through repetition, through preparation, through results. Weak people try to appear confident. Strong people build confidence. There is a massive difference. You have a choice. You can spend your life pretending, or you can start building real internal strength, because fake confidence collapses under pressure. Real confidence survives pressure. Think about someone who trains consistently for years. Their confidence in the gym becomes natural because it was built through repetition. Think about someone who studies deeply and develops real expertise. They speak calmly because preparation removed insecurity. Think about experienced athletes under pressure, experienced leaders during crisis, experienced professionals handling difficulty. Their calmness comes from competence, not empty affirmations. That's why competence matters so much. Confidence is earned privately before it is displayed publicly. Most insecure people want confidence without discipline. They want certainty without preparation. They want results without repetition. But confidence cannot be borrowed, it must be built. One promise kept at a time. One difficult action completed at a time. One disciplined day at a time. That is how self-belief becomes real. You don't need their permission. You do not need constant validation to believe in yourself. You need evidence. Evidence built through action. Because your mind trusts proof more than words. If you constantly quit on yourself, your self-respect weakens. If you constantly avoid discomfort, your confidence shrinks. If you constantly break promises to yourself, insecurity grows internally. That is why discipline and confidence are connected directly. Disciplined people trust themselves more. Why? Because they repeatedly prove reliability internally. They say they will wake up early, and they do it. They say they will train consistently, and they do it. They say they will improve, and they continue. That repetition builds trust with yourself. And self-trust creates real confidence. That's the key. Many people try to use positive thinking alone to solve deep insecurity, but confidence without action becomes fantasy. You cannot think your way into self-respect while your habits continue destroying your discipline. It's not about affirmations, it's about discipline. That's the truth. A person who consistently avoids responsibility cannot feel deeply confident internally, because internally they know they are avoiding growth. But disciplined people move differently. They become quieter emotionally, less reactive, less desperate for approval. Why? Because real confidence removes the need to constantly prove yourself publicly. Weak people talk constantly about what they plan to do. Strong people quietly prepare, then execute. That's the difference. Confidence is earned privately before it is displayed publicly. Never forget that. Preparation creates calmness. That is why disciplined people prepare more than they speak. They understand something powerful. Pressure exposes preparation. Under pressure, weak preparation becomes visible immediately. A student who never studied panics during exams. An athlete who never trained properly collapses during competition. A leader without emotional discipline breaks during crisis. Pressure reveals the truth. That is why preparation matters so much. You have a choice. Prepare seriously, or suffer unnecessary insecurity later. Because much of insecurity comes from lack of preparation. People fear situations they know they are unprepared for. That is normal, but disciplined people reduce fear through action. They study, practice, train, repeat. And repetition creates confidence gradually, not overnight, gradually. That's the key. Real confidence grows slowly, like strength, like discipline, like resilience. And because it grows slowly, many people quit too early. They want immediate certainty, immediate results, immediate transformation. But confidence is built through accumulated proof. One disciplined action after another. One uncomfortable situation survived after another. One difficult challenge overcome after another. That process creates internal stability, and stable people become powerful. You don't need their permission. You do not need everyone to notice your growth immediately. In fact, the strongest confidence often develops privately before anyone else sees the results. People only notice confidence publicly after years of invisible work already happened internally. That is why comparing yourself constantly is dangerous. You are often comparing your beginning to someone else's years of preparation. Focus on your own growth instead. Build your own proof. Build your own discipline. Build your own standards. That is how confidence becomes authentic. Not through imitation, through construction. Confidence is earned privately before it is displayed publicly. There is another truth people avoid. Arrogance and confidence are not the same thing. Arrogant people often overcompensate for insecurity. They constantly seek attention, constantly need recognition, constantly try to dominate conversations. Why? Because internally they still feel uncertain. Real confidence behaves differently. It stays calm, focused, patient, grounded. Because real confidence does not need constant external reinforcement. That's the key. Strong people are usually less interested in impressing others. They are more focused on improving themselves. That internal focus creates peace. Because when your self-worth depends entirely on external reactions, emotional instability becomes unavoidable. One compliment raises your mood. One criticism destroys it. That is emotional dependence. Disciplined people build deeper stability internally. They become less controlled by outside opinions. Not because they ignore feedback completely, but because their identity is rooted in action, not applause. That changes everything. You have a choice. Continue performing confidence externally, or build confidence internally through discipline. Because eventually fake confidence gets exposed, but earned confidence becomes undeniable. Think about the strongest people you know personally. Usually they are not the loudest. They do not constantly announce their value. Their confidence feels calm, stable, controlled. Why? Because they trust themselves. And self-trust comes from consistency. That is why consistency matters so much. Every disciplined action becomes another vote for the person you are becoming. Every promise kept strengthens identity. Every difficult task completed increases self-respect. And self-respect creates confidence naturally. That's the key. Confidence is not magic, it is memory. Memory of surviving difficult situations. Memory of keeping promises. Memory of overcoming fear repeatedly. That evidence becomes internal certainty, and certainty changes posture, energy, decision-making, focus, leadership, everything. You don't need their permission. You do not need to become loud to become powerful. You need discipline. You need preparation. You need consistency. You need self-respect built through action. Because confidence is earned privately before it is displayed publicly. Never forget that. You stopped waiting for rescue. You stopped depending on motivation. You confronted destructive habits. You detached from validation. You learned to endure pain. You mastered emotional control. You focused on yourself completely. Now you are building the quiet confidence that comes from discipline itself. And once confidence becomes internal instead of performative, you become ready for the final transformation, making discipline your identity completely. Chapter 9. Become addicted to discipline. Most people are addicted to comfort. That is the problem. They crave easy entertainment, easy pleasure, easy distraction, easy excuses. And because of that, they never discover what they are actually capable of becoming. Comfort weakens people slowly. Discipline transforms people slowly. That's the key. The strongest people in the world are not always the most talented. They are often the most disciplined, because discipline creates consistency, and consistency creates transformation. You have a choice. You can continue chasing comfort, or you can become addicted to discipline itself. Because eventually discipline stops feeling like punishment. It becomes identity. The life you want is hidden inside the work you avoid. That sentence explains why most people remain stuck. They avoid the difficult conversation, avoid the early mornings, avoid the training, avoid the studying, avoid the responsibility, avoid the sacrifice, and then they wonder why their lives remain unchanged. Your future is hidden inside the uncomfortable actions you keep postponing. That's the truth. Most people are waiting for some magical moment where discipline suddenly becomes easy. That moment never comes. Discipline is difficult in the beginning, especially when your mind has been trained for comfort constantly. Waking up early feels difficult initially. Training consistently feels difficult initially. Staying focused feels difficult initially. Controlling distractions feels difficult initially. But repetition changes identity, and identity changes behavior naturally. That's the key. Disciplined people no longer debate with themselves constantly. Their habits became automatic. That is real power. Think about someone who trains every single morning for years. At first, it required force. Now it requires identity. They are no longer trying to become disciplined. They became disciplined. There is a difference. Weak people rely on emotional motivation. Strong people rely on systems, routines, standards, structure. That is why routines matter so much, because routines remove unnecessary decisions, and fewer unnecessary decisions create more mental clarity. Successful people understand this deeply. Athletes train even when tired. Writers write even when uninspired. Entrepreneurs work even when results are slow. Disciplined people continue regardless of emotions. Do it tired, do it uninspired, do it anyway. That mindset changes lives, because life rewards consistency more than intensity. One disciplined action repeated for years becomes transformation. That's the key. People admire mastery but hate repetition. But mastery is repetition. Every expert repeated fundamentals endlessly. Every strong person repeated difficult behaviors endlessly. Every disciplined individual mastered boredom. That last part matters deeply. Most people fail because they cannot tolerate repetition emotionally. They need constant excitement, constant novelty, constant stimulation. But real growth often feels repetitive. Wake up, train, focus, work, improve, repeat. That repetition builds power. You have a choice. You can become addicted to entertainment or addicted to improvement, because addiction works both ways. Some people become addicted to distraction. Others become addicted to growth. The difference is life-changing. The life you want is hidden inside the work you avoid. Maybe your future is hidden inside waking up earlier, inside reading more, inside building skills, inside training your body, inside controlling your emotions, inside finally facing responsibilities directly. Most people already know what they need to do. They simply refuse to do it consistently. That is why discipline matters more than knowledge. Knowledge without execution changes nothing. Execution changes everything. You don't need their permission. You do not need applause for becoming disciplined. You do not need motivation every morning. You need standards, because standards create structure, and structure protects your future. Weak people negotiate with discipline constantly. Maybe tomorrow, maybe later. I'm tired today. Strong people remove negotiation. They already decided who they want to become. That decision creates consistency. That consistency creates identity. That identity creates results. That's the key. Discipline also creates freedom. People misunderstand this completely. They think discipline limits freedom. No. Lack of discipline creates limitation. Undisciplined spending creates financial stress. Undisciplined health habits create physical weakness. Undisciplined emotions create chaos. Undisciplined thinking creates regret. Discipline creates stability, and stability creates freedom. A disciplined person controls themselves. A weak person gets controlled by impulses. That difference shapes destiny. Look carefully at highly successful people. Most of them became obsessed with structure. Not because structure is exciting, but because structure works. Early mornings, focused routines, consistent habits, intentional living, years of repetition. People only see the success later. They rarely see the discipline years beforehand. That's why discipline feels invisible at first. The rewards arrive slowly, but when they arrive, they change everything. The life you want is hidden inside the work you avoid. That sentence should challenge you deeply, because the uncomfortable action you keep delaying may be the exact thing capable of transforming your future. The business idea you fear starting, the body you keep postponing building, the emotional healing you keep avoiding, the discipline you keep delaying. Everything changes once action begins. Not perfect action, consistent action. That's the key. Most people overestimate motivation and underestimate momentum. Momentum is powerful. Once disciplined habits become normal, life becomes easier to manage mentally. Focus improves, confidence improves, emotional stability improves, self-respect improves. Why? Because disciplined people trust themselves more, and self-trust creates power. There will still be difficult days, still exhausting days, still frustrating moments, but disciplined people continue anyway. That is why they eventually separate themselves from average thinking. Average people stop when emotions change. Disciplined people continue when emotions change. That difference compounds over years. You have a choice: remain emotionally driven or become discipline-driven. Because discipline-driven people eventually become unstoppable internally. Not because life became easier, but because their standards became stronger. You don't need their permission. You do not need the perfect conditions to begin. You need commitment. Commitment during difficult mornings. Commitment during slow progress. Commitment during lonely seasons. Commitment during discomfort. That commitment eventually becomes identity, and identity changes everything. The strongest people are not constantly fighting themselves internally anymore. They train themselves already. Their habits support them instead of sabotaging them. That is freedom. That is power. That is transformation. The life you want is hidden inside the work you avoid. Never forget that. You stopped waiting for rescue. You stopped depending on motivation. You confronted destructive habits. You detached from validation. You learned to endure pain. You mastered emotional control. You focused on yourself. You built quiet confidence. Now discipline itself is becoming your identity. And once discipline becomes identity, there is only one final lesson left: the responsibility to build a life that truly matters. Chapter 10. Build the person you were meant to be. At some point, you must make a decision, a real decision, not an emotional promise, not temporary motivation, not another moment of inspiration that disappears tomorrow. A decision. A decision to stop living accidentally. A decision to stop surviving emotionally. A decision to finally become intentional about your life. Because whether you realize it or not, your future is being built right now. Through your habits, through your mindset, through your discipline, through your daily choices. You either build yourself or life will break you. That is the final truth. Life does not stay neutral. If you refuse to build strength, weakness grows automatically. If you refuse discipline, chaos takes control. If you refuse responsibility, regret eventually arrives. That is why intentional living matters so much. Most people drift through life unconsciously. Wake up, react emotionally, waste time, repeat distractions, complain about circumstances, blame other people, then wonder why nothing changes. But transformation begins the moment responsibility becomes personal. That's the key. Nobody's coming to save you. That was the beginning of this journey, and now you understand why that truth is powerful instead of depressing. Because once responsibility becomes yours, power also becomes yours. You have a choice. Remain a victim of your habits or become the architect of your future. Because every disciplined action shapes identity, and identity shapes destiny. Everything in this audiobook connects together. You stopped waiting for rescue. You stopped depending on motivation. You confronted destructive habits. You detached from validation. You learned to endure pain. You mastered emotional control. You focused on yourself. You built silent confidence. You became addicted to discipline. Now the final step is becoming intentional about who you are building. Because discipline without direction creates emptiness. You must build towards something meaningful. That's the key. Ask yourself honestly, who are you becoming through your current behavior? Not who you pretend to be online, not who you hope to become someday. Who are you becoming daily? Because your repeated actions are writing your future in real time. A distracted person becomes weaker over time. A disciplined person becomes stronger over time. An emotionally reactive person creates chaos over time. A focused person creates progress over time. Everything compounds. That is why small daily decisions matter more than dramatic promises. You don't need their permission. You do not need approval to reinvent yourself. You do not need validation to become disciplined. You do not need perfect conditions to start changing. You simply need honesty. Honesty about your habits. Honesty about your weaknesses. Honesty about your excuses. Because excuses delay transformation. Responsibility accelerates transformation. Weak people constantly explain why they cannot grow. Strong people adjust and continue. That is the difference. You either build yourself or life will break you. Understand something important. Life will test everyone eventually. Pain arrives eventually. Pressure arrives eventually. Loss arrives eventually. Rejection arrives eventually. Difficulty arrives eventually. The question is whether you prepared yourself mentally before those moments arrived. Because discipline is preparation, emotional control is preparation, resilience is preparation, focus is preparation. Everything you build internally becomes protection externally. That's the key. Most people wait until life breaks them before they finally change. After heartbreak, after failure, after financial collapse, after emotional exhaustion, pain finally forces growth. But wise people choose growth before destruction becomes necessary. That is maturity. That is awareness. That is intentional living. You have a choice. Continue repeating cycles that weaken you, or build systems that strengthen you. Because eventually, repeated weakness becomes suffering, and repeated discipline becomes freedom. Think carefully about the life you truly want, not the life designed by social pressure, not the life built around comparison, your real life, the person you actually want to become. What habits would that person have? What standards would they follow? How would they respond to pressure? How would they manage time? How would they treat people? How would they think daily? Because transformation becomes easier once identity becomes clear. Most people fail because they want results without becoming the type of person capable of sustaining those results. That's the truth. A weak mindset cannot sustain success long-term. An undisciplined person cannot sustain freedom long-term. An emotionally unstable person cannot sustain peace long-term. Everything external eventually reflects what exists internally. That's why internal work matters first. You either build yourself or life will break you. There is no escaping growth forever. You either choose discomfort intentionally now or experience suffering unintentionally later. Disciplined people understand delayed gratification. They sacrifice temporary comfort to create long-term strength. Weak people sacrifice long-term growth for temporary comfort. And years later, the results become obvious. One person grows stronger. The other grows more regretful. You don't need their permission. You do not need everyone to understand your transformation. Some people will misunderstand your focus. Some will criticize your discipline. Some will feel uncomfortable watching you evolve. Let them, because your responsibility is not remaining small, so others feel comfortable. Your responsibility is becoming who you were meant to become. That requires courage. It requires discipline. It requires emotional control. It requires consistency. And most importantly, it requires ownership. Full ownership. No more excuses. No more blame. No more waiting. No more emotional dependence. No more wasting potential. That version of you must die. That's the key. A stronger version of you is waiting on the other side of discipline. A calmer version. A more focused version. A more resilient version. A more confident version. But that version cannot appear while old habits remain in control. Transformation requires separation from weakness, separation from distraction, separation from excuses. And that process is uncomfortable. But discomfort creates growth. Always, you have a choice, every single day, to remain average or become intentional, to remain distracted or become disciplined, to remain emotionally reactive or become mentally strong, to remain stuck or finally evolve. That choice belongs to you now. Nobody is coming to save you, and that is your power, because once you fully accept responsibility for your life, you stop waiting. You start building, quietly, consistently, relentlessly, day by day, habit by habit, decision by decision, until eventually you become unrecognizable to your former self. You either build yourself or life will break you. Choose wisely.